Oh yeah, this was the pen inside it too. Okay, so that's why it's okay. Because they have the pen inside.
Back up. It's okay. Good girl, Shiva. I know you want to drive them. Up. I've got artificial knees. No. There we go. Up, up, up. There we go. Good boy. Oh yeah.
Hello my friends, welcome to my channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads. If you're new here, special welcome to you. I'm Lindy, I read a lot, and I've got 5 books to tell you about that I finished in the last week. But before I get to that, I want to tell you a little bit about what I've been doing in the past week. First off, an explanation about those goats that you saw at the beginning of this video. So I was up in the Yukon visiting my sister Simone, who has a farm there, and there was a call that went out. They needed a volunteer, somebody who could move some goats, and this was because a woman who had been farming for a long time in the Yukon had decided to retire and get out of farming, and a young couple has bought her goats, and they just needed to transport them. So I went along for the ride, and while we were driving down the Klondike Highway, there was an event going on, a vintage and classic car marathon. It started in Anchorage on August 27th, and they have 30 days, so they're going to end up in the Baja Peninsula in Mexico by September 26th, I think it is. So the segment of the rally that was from Dawson City to Whitehorse happened to be on the same time that we were driving, and so we saw on the way up to the farm, we saw all these classic cars, vintage cars, passing us with numbers on the side of them, so it was obviously part of some event. We could see the Alaska to Mexico logo that was across the back, so I had to look it up when we got home. Quite an adventure, I'm sure. But let's get back to my adventures. One of the fun things that I did in Whitehorse was a workshop put on by the Northern Fibers Guild, of which I'm a member. They brought in Bryan Whitehead, who has been living in Japan for over 30 years, and he's been studying traditional textile techniques. What we learned was Katazome, which is a stencil rice paste resist technique where you get designs when you dye the fabric in indigo. So I'll show you a little bit scenes from that workshop. Bryan brought some traditional stencils with him that we could use. I made stuff like this and this. And we also cut our own stencils. So I was inspired by the chokecherry tree growing outside the venue where we were doing this, and I made a couple of quilt squares, including a jug for chokecherry syrup. That's what that is. There's another one that combines the plum blossom traditional stencil with the chokecherry ones that I did myself. And I made all kinds of bandanas, like the ones that I'm wearing. Oh, we just had such a great time. It was a wonderful, wonderful workshop. And I also had a lovely visit with my sister and her 2 children who are adults now. This is her daughter Jamie, who's got this great hair, and Jamie's eldest, Adara, also has beautiful colored hair. She's too shy to show her face. And I just got home last night. Now, the exciting thing that's happening next week is the Giller Prize, Canada's premier fiction surprise, is going to be announcing the long list next week on Wednesday. And I want to get out my wish list before that, so that will be coming. Hopefully this weekend, I'll get that done. And I did read 3 books that are eligible for the Giller, which I will be talking about in this video. And all 3 of them had Tim Hortons references. I will talk more about that later in this video as well. But just so you know, I will link to Tim Hortons on my book blog if you are curious to know more. I think it's a great taste of what Canadian writing is like, just to have these little samples that mention Tim Hortons. So 2 of the books I made separate videos for while I was in Whitehorse, because I wanted to leave the books behind for my sister there to read. And here goes. River Mumma by Zalika Reid-Benta. This is a brand new Canadian novel, just came out in August 2023, and I picked it up at the airport in Edmonton on my way to Whitehorse. I could not resist. Look at that gorgeous, gorgeous cover with copper foil on it. It's got French flaps. There's a picture of the author there. I really enjoyed her debut collection of short stories, Frying Plantain. That was longlisted for the Giller in 2020 and won the Danuta Gleed Award, and I think was shortlisted for a bunch of other awards as well. So I was pretty excited to see that this is her first novel, and it is set in Toronto. It's contemporary realism with a great big dose of magic in the form of Caribbean folklore about a river deity, River Mumma, hence the title. Our central character, Alicia, is in her early 20s, mid-20s, I guess. She has completed her grad studies, can't find a job, and is pretty lost. And then she gets contacted by none other than River Mumma, who wants her comb back. And it's up to Alicia to find it. There's even a lovely graphic of a comb. And by the way, Lisa Stringfellow's middle grade novel, A Comb of Wishes, also features this very same kind of artifact. Not only is it set in Toronto, but there's this great map, and it shows the 2 rivers that run through the city, the Humber and the West Don, and also Lake Ontario. There's a Tim Hortons that's mentioned in the story, and if you don't already know this, on my book blog I keep a record of all of the times that I encounter Tim Hortons references in fiction and nonfiction, actually. And so I got another entry to add, thanks to Zalika Reid-Benta. Her story has got lots of action. It's practically a romp or a hero's quest. I'm trying to film this so that I can leave this book behind for my sister to read, and just making do. We're in a parking lot and there are some disruptions happening. Forgive me for that. Short form, this is great. It's got the Afro-Caribbean experience of young people in Toronto. It's full of life, full of energy, full of fun, and I recommend it. Next up is a Canadian novel that just came out this year in 2023, The Broken Heart of Winter by Judy LeBlanc. It's about the Acadians and the expulsion of the Canadians. It's called in French Le Grand Dérangement. And the author herself is of Acadian descent. And I'll read you a little bit from her acknowledgements. So after the British defeated the French in Canada, the Acadians wanted to remain neutral and support neither the French nor the English. And neither the British nor the French trusted the Acadians, and they were forced to leave and make room for English settlers. So they were mostly located in New Brunswick and Nova Scotia. And in this novel, Grand Pré, Nova Scotia, is the homeland of the people that we are characters that we're reading about in the story. So the author says that she went to visit a small plaque at Wilson's Point on the Miramichi River that said the island opposite this point served as a concentration camp for refugee Acadians from 1756 to 1759. It was termed Camp d'Espérance. There was little more than that, though on a larger plaque there was much on the 19th century shipbuilding industry. Nothing was said of the 400 Acadians who died of starvation and disease in the winter of 1756-57. I returned home from that trip curious about the impact of a catastrophic historical event on the descendants of the survivors. I wanted to ask in a novel if patterns of deep disruption repeat themselves generation after generation, and whether estrangement can become a way of being in the world. So this book is told in 3 time periods. The first part is set in Victoria and Halifax in 2001. The second part is Ile Madame, 1832, Nova Scotia. And the final part is Acadia, 1755 to 63. If you're interested in learning more about what happened with the expulsion of the Acadians, there are some authors that she recommends in the acknowledgements. And I found a surprising number of personal connections. For example, the names of the people that she talks about in here are names that I recognize from the family reunion that I attended a couple of weekends ago, the Desaulniers family reunion in the Yamachiche area of Quebec, where my ancestors welcomed hundreds of Acadians onto their land at Yamachiche, and there was a list that I found online of the names of the Acadian families, and I see those, or came across those names in here as well. And because of my Franco-Canadian heritage, I could identify with things like sugar pie, and a song that I've known since I was a child that is about the expulsion of the Canadians. Maybe I will sing a little bit of that song and include it at the very end of this video. We'll see. I really enjoy historical fiction that has strong characterization and a really strong setting, and that comes through in this book. And the underlying theme of trauma through generations is also one that really interests me. So if that sounds good to you, I recommend The Broken Heart of Winter. And one more thing, I picked this up for the Nova Scotia component of Read Across Canada, the challenge that Jolene of Bookworm Adventure Girl has been doing, a year-long Read Canadian Authors Challenge. In the month of August is to read something by a Nova Scotia writer or set in Nova Scotia. So this one fits the bill for that. Okay, so the third Canadian 2023 novel that I read in the past week is called The Adult. It's by Bronwyn Fischer. It's the story of an 18-year-old who moves from northern Ontario, a very remote hunting lodge kind of place is where she grew up, and she goes to Toronto to go to university. And she's so timid and uncertain, and initially I was quite put off. This character just seemed too unformed for me, but I'm glad that I stuck with it. It's the story of her falling in love with an older woman and what happens after that. I thought I could tell the trajectory of this novel, and it wasn't until I was 3/4 of the way through that there was kind of a shoe that dropped. I was like, oh. And in the end, I did think that this was really, really well done. Definitely recommend it. I gave it 4 stars. Actually, all but the final book that I'm going to be telling you about today are somewhere in the 4-star range. Final book, my best book of the week. But I just wanted to say that I'm glad that I didn't DNF this too quickly, because I ended up quite liking this queer book. Next up is another queer one, a memoir by a trans woman. It's Geena Rocero's Horse Barbie. Geena Rocero grew up in the Philippines, and she competed at a high level in the trans beauty pageants, which are a big deal there, and she writes about that in the book. But the opening chapter has her in the modeling world in New York City, where nobody knows that she's trans, and she's really afraid that her transness will be clocked. And so it's about living with that fear. She has good reason not to come out, because she gives the example of the model Tula, who was famous as a model and in a James Bond movie, and then once she was outed as trans, she had no work anymore. So there is a lot of poignancy in this memoir, even though I wouldn't say that I'm particularly interested in the modeling world or trans beauty pageants and all that, but Geena Rocero's personality is really engaging. She reads the audiobook, which is what I listen to. She includes a lot of Tagalog expressions and explains some of the humor and how it works in Tagalog. And really the best part is her decision that she had to be out and fully live her own life on her own terms and be loved for who she is. And it's heartwarming. I can link to her TED Talk down below where she talks about being trans, and I also recommend this memoir. Now, last up is the book that I read for the Book Naturalists book club, Buzz, Sting, Bite, Why We Need Insects. It's by Sverdrup-Thygeson, and it's translated by Lucy Moffatt. Heidi of My Reading Life and Doris of Audibooks have been doing this Book Naturalists book club. If you're not familiar, just look for some links down below. Heidi did a great review of this. It has been published with another title in English, Extraordinary Insects, but this is what I had at the local public library, the same book, And it is full of really fun, interesting facts about insects. And not only that, that subtitle, Why We Need Insects. If you want to know why do we have mosquitoes? Why do we have wasps? Read this book, and I think you'll be convinced that it's worth putting up with the annoyance. It's just great. And if you want more about insects, the other book that I recommend is by Dave Goulson, and it's called Silent Earth, Averting the Insect Apocalypse. That just came out in 2022, I think. There'll be information down below in the description box. 2 great books about insects, and this one did double duty because August is Women in Translation Month. It's translated from Norwegian, so good job, Heidi and Doris, for choosing this one. I loved it. And that's all that I've got to tell you about today. Thank you so very much for watching. I really appreciate your time, and I also love to hear from you in the comments. So please say hello down below. And if you want to hear me sing the song about a poor wandering Acadian, stay tuned for that last little bit. Bye for now.
Un Canadien errant, banni de ses foyers, parcourait en pleurant des pays étrangers, parcourait en pleurant des pays étrangers. Un jour triste et pensif, assis au bord du flot, au courant fugitif, il adressa ces mots. Au courant fugitif, il adressa ces mots. Si tu vois mon pays malheureux, va dire à mes amis que je me souviens d'eux. Va dire à mes amis que je me souviens